Hello and welcome to Chapter 8, the Art Center, CHD 124, Program Planning. So we're going to talk a little bit about how to do art in your classroom, and don't just limit it to the Art Center. It should be part of all of your days. So let's go on and talk about what we're learning in this chapter. We're learning about how valuable art is in the early childhood classroom. Think about it. It's not just because you're making beautiful things to send home with kids. When kids are doing art, they're stretching their creativity, they're understanding what they're thinking about, they're doing physical skills, they're learning science and how different textures and colors blend together. So, art is not just about beautiful pictures, it's all kinds of stuff. Um, we'll talk about setting up your art center, making sure your classroom is beautiful, and then what kinds of art activities you can do for physical development, because the art that children do in preschool is a precursor to learning how to write, right? Art also has implications in reading development, language development, everything. And then little kids can do cool art that's based on real artists. We'll talk a little bit about that. Um, we can talk about how art activities promote emotional development. How does this art make you feel? How does this music make you feel? Creative development, obviously, and what's your role in the art center? So we think about art for communication, right? I'm trying to tell you a story, and since I can't write it down, I'm drawing pictures for you. As visible thinking, I'm thinking through a process and jotting it down as I go. Expression, obviously, and manipulating the medium. So one of the most important things, especially with younger kids, is not the finished product. It is the action of doing the art. It's the feeling the paint. It's the moving the paintbrush. It's the rubbing chalk on the sidewalk. Those are all things that are important in early childhood, as important as whatever your finished product is. So we start with scribbling, right? It's just holding the crayon or pencil or chalk, however, or marker, however, and making marks on paper. That's our first step, right? Or paintbrush, whatever you're doing. And then children start doing basic shapes. Your book talks a lot about a mandala, and I wanted to show you what this is. This is a mandala, and your book connects this with, first cave paintings and that kind of stuff. Quite honestly, I've never seen a child make something like this before. So it's an interesting thought, but in practice, I don't know that it's something that happens. Now, kids do learn to make circles, they learn to make different shapes, and they put shapes together. I've just never seen a specific mandala, and this is like a fancy one. The sun, right? We see a lot of drawing of the sun. And then our first drawings of representations of ourselves, humans, tend to be face. Because think about it, that is, sort of the most important part of a person to a little kid. And then as they understand themselves better and the people around them, what you'll see is heads with arms and legs, right? The body part, it doesn't have a purpose really or much notice in a little child's experience, so it doesn't get there until they're a little bit older. All right, so in your classroom you should have an easel available all the time. Okay, so you want kids to be able to go and use the easel whenever they feel like it during free period, right? So the best thing you can do is have your easel. A lot of those easels have the little ledge that you can put paint in with paintbrushes. Always good to have those paint cups that have the funnels in them so kids aren't getting paint all over. And here's a tip. If you take your paint cup and you put a plastic bag in it and then a rubber band around the outside and then put your paint in, you don't have to wash your paint cups all the time. Have kids give kids access to the easel all the time. And don't be concerned if your kids are going to the easel, spending 20 minutes painting, painting, painting. They may paint something that looks beautiful and then continue to add paint and add paint until it's brown or gray and there are holes in it. It is not to them about what that final painting looks like. It is, I'm standing at the easel, I'm making these motions, I'm seeing what happens when I put paint on this paper, I'm seeing these colors blend together, I'm seeing what happens if I keep doing it and keep doing it and keep doing it. For the most part, they're not there to paint a beautiful picture. They are there to have an experience. And so, because this is how this happens, what happens then is you have at the end of the experience crumpled up, really wet pages that are gray or brown with holes in them. Don't worry about sending that home to parents. It was not an art experience for the children where they're creating something. It's an art experience for the children where they're doing something. It's a process, not a product. And for the vast majority of early childhood art experiences, you need to think about it in the process and not the product. Making sure that you have stuff in your art area that's accessible and easy for children to use. So, in your art area, you may have bins where you have old paper. It doesn't matter, it doesn't have to be perfect paper for kids to write on or draw on. Lots of markers, lots of crayons, chalk, watercolor paints. Have all of this stuff available. And then also have a big bucket with torn up newspapers or magazines or just little scraps of paper, collage materials, little pieces of ribbon, anything that you can think of that kids can incorporate into their art, you want to have available to them. You want to have glue available to them. Sometimes it's easier with little kids to have, they make little jars with screw off tops with brushes that you can fill up with glue instead of having squeeze bottles. Although squeeze bottles are good for you, developing those muscles, it's also good to have little brushes, or you can do cups with Q-tips with glue, whatever works. Squeeze bottles tend to get globbed up, but put out any kinds of materials that they can just incorporate. It doesn't have to be art stuff, right? I had a little girl who her art projects were not finished until she had glued half a dozen Q-tips on it. That was just sort of her signature thing. This is a 3-year-old, that's fine. Stickers, anything you can think of that they can incorporate into their art. Another thing you want to do is make sure that your classroom is a pleasing place to be, right? You've often seen classrooms where there's just too much stuff. Like when the thing that bugs me the most is when I go into a classroom in April and we still have holiday winter stuff hanging up. Make sure that you are replacing things throughout the year, not just adding, right? Don't put stuff up just to make it pretty, because that's what kids' art is for. You should be hanging up kids' art all around your classroom. You should be doing things like creating a bulletin board where each kid has a space where they can hang up their stuff. You can have a door that's a gallery, right? Making sure that it's not just a bunch of stuff all over the place. And because kids create a lot of art in early childhood, you don't need to save all of it. You don't need to feel like it's precious things, because remember, for them, most of the time, it's about the act and not the final product. Okay? Talk about what is beautiful in your classroom or outside or among the children in your world, right? Have kids take photos of themselves, have them do handprinting, make sure that they can see themselves in their art. One of the things that we did that was really cool was, if you look up Andy Warhol, maybe you know Andy Warhol, he was a pop artist in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and he did portraits of Marilyn Monroe that were all different colors, right? So one thing that we did with our kids was we took black and white photos of them and made 8 by 10 copies of them, and then just let them color with different markers inspired by Andy Warhol. And they loved doing that, and they loved coloring pictures of each other. Another thing that's fun is to put kids at the easel and have them paint pictures of each other. Sometimes when kids are at the easel, it is all about that movement or whatever. Sometimes it's nice to suggest to a child, hey, could you do a painting of this? Could you do a painting of Lacey? And have them pair up and do that. So incorporating them into their work is really good. Small motor skills, like, come on, right? Art is a great way to do small motor stuff. One thing that we did that was an interesting way of doing things differently is lying on the floor underneath the table, drawing up like this, right? Just for fun, just to try something new and use your muscles and thinking in a different way. Small motor is cutting, right? Your book says use sharp scissors to practice cutting. I think that's fine. I think what's most important is to practice cutting. Kids should have lots and lots of opportunities to practice cutting, and they don't get as many as they need. So giving kids access to scissors that are safe, giving them scissors that have patterns is fun because then they can cut different patterns. Letting them fold and cut, tearing up things, squeeze bottles of paint, all kinds of stuff. And then, of course, large motor activities. Have children arm dance with crayons, right? Use 2 arms with crayon in each hand. One fun way of doing large motor is get your trucks out and roll them through paint and run them along on a big piece of paper on the floor. Having paper on the floor. Okay, so one of our things that we used to do for Halloween, which was always super fun, is just taping a big sheet of paper down on the floor and letting kids go crazy with crayons. They loved it. It was totally different from sitting at their table with a 8 by 10 piece of paper in front of them. They would lie down on the paper. They would draw. They would trace themselves, all kinds of stuff. Just putting a piece of paper on the floor and letting them go crazy is fun. In our toddler room, we had a place on the wall where we had a piece of paper and crayons, and kids could just stand there. It was right down near the floor so they could reach it and draw. Ways to promote cognitive development, introducing one color at a time, talking about this is red. What's red? Apples are red. Fire trucks are red. Red is spelled R-E-D, like all of the ways that you understand red. Having a color of the week, it's red week or red day. So wear a red shirt or bring something red. Mixing paint. A great book about mixing colors is Little Blue and Little Yellow by Leo Leone. It's one of my favorite books to do with kids. It's kind of a weird book, but it's fun. It's a good way to move into understanding how colors blend, right? And talking about yellow and blue make green, red and blue make purple. We did once different frostings, and we mixed together red and blue frosting to see if it would make purple. Kind of always made gray, but whatever. Having one of my favorite other things to do is having squirt bottles with water and food coloring in them, and just having kids spray like crazy at a sheet on the wall. Make sure you put plastic behind it and underneath it, or we had it on the floor. Or in the wintertime, a great thing to do is bring snow into your sand and water table and let them just spray it with food coloring and see what happens. They can do that for hours. Let children make up crayon talk stories, have children tell stories about what they see, use art vocabulary words in talking about art. So how are we talking about the things that we're doing? We're talking about paint, we're talking about easel, we're talking about brush, we're talking about palette. A palette is what you keep your paint on, right, painters? There are all kinds of books about art and doing art and artists, and those are a great place to come up with new words and ideas about art and language. Modern art in children's picture books. Your book has lists of, I believe, art. Yes, children's books about art, a very long list. And the librarians at any library are super helpful with that. Look at children's books that have different painters' work. There are all kinds of books. One of a really good one to use with kids is about Henri Matisse and his. He started out doing painting, and then he developed cancer and couldn't paint anymore. So he started doing huge collages with cut paper, and we did paper collages with little kids. Great ways to work with kids and incorporate art and artists. Water play, like I talked about with snow in the water table, using sponges, right? Another thing that you can do that is so fun for little kids is just give them a bucket and a paintbrush, like a house painting paintbrush, take them outside and let them paint on the sidewalk. It's there for a while and then it disappears. Dough and clay, you should always have Play-Doh available in your classroom for kids all the time, and kids love it. Support creativity with encouragement rather than direction. So what that means is you want to talk about what you see and what they're doing and ask questions and not say, now let's all sit down and draw an apple, right? That's not really what we want in preschool. We want kids to be able to develop their own experiences. Having free choice materials always available. Make sure your art center is always open. Creativity connotes freedom. So that is freedom of choice, freedom to come up with your own ideas. And then if you don't know the book, It Looked Like Spilled Milk. This book right here is a great way to develop cloud paintings, to go outside and look at clouds and see, what does that cloud look like, right? And then there's all kinds of ways you can incorporate that into an art project. Give them black paper or blue paper and chalk and have them draw. Have them do a fold over painting where you give them a piece of blue paper, put some white paint in the middle, fold it in half, open it up. What does it look like? What's your role? Making sure you have appropriate materials, making sure your materials are not chaotic. So every day you're going to need to go at the end of the day and clean up the art center. No question, right? You're going to need to sort the markers back. You're going to need to get rid of broken crayons, although broken crayons can be used to melt down to make new crayons, right? Making sure that you have things that are accessible and interesting to all kids, and then making sure that you are also keeping some of the art that they create, right? It's important to show children's development over time. And so having those first drawings where they're just making scribbles on the paper, all the way up to an intentional drawing where they're setting out to draw a dog, a house, whatever. Keeping examples of that stuff in their portfolios throughout time. And that's it. Art is so much fun. And the less you, I think, plan activities, the better you are. Think about, instead of planning activities, think about, here are some things I'm going to put out today so the kids can play with and see what happens. Have fun.